Before the world knew his name, before the cameras and the church crowds, there was just a young man from Baltimore named Zachery Tims, lost, broken, and running from the pain of a life that seemed determined to crush him. He was born on April 18, 1969, into a world filled with struggle. His childhood was shaped by instability and poverty, and by the time he reached his teenage years, he had fallen deep into the grip of addiction. Crack cocaine became his escape, his way of numbing everything that hurt. No one would have looked at him then and imagined that one day he'd stand on a pulpit preaching to thousands, but God had other plans, and even in the darkest corners of his life, that purpose was quietly forming. When he was just 19, after being arrested and locked in a cell, something happened that changed everything. In that jail, where his life seemed all but over, Zachery said he heard the voice of God calling out to him, telling him that his life was not a waste, that there was still purpose waiting for him if he was willing to surrender. It was there, in that cell, that he made a promise: if God gave him another chance, he'd dedicate the rest of his life to serving him. And when he was released, he did just that. Determined to rebuild his life, Zachery enrolled in college and earned a degree in psychology from the University of Maryland. Slowly, people began to notice a transformation in him. He was no longer just surviving, he was being reborn. In the mid-1990s, Zachery and his wife Riva moved to Florida with a vision burning in their hearts. Together, they founded New Destiny Christian Center in a small space just outside Orlando. What began with only a handful of believers soon grew into something that no one could have predicted. Week after week, more people came, drawn not just by Zachery's passionate preaching, but by the raw honesty that poured out of him. He didn't pretend to be perfect. He spoke openly about his past, his addictions, his failures, and his redemption. That honesty made people feel seen. It made them believe that if God could save him, maybe he could save them too. By the early 2000s, Pastor Zachery Tims was no longer just a local preacher. His church had exploded in size, and his sermons were being broadcast across the country on the Trinity Broadcasting Network. He was traveling the world, preaching to massive crowds, writing books, and becoming one of the most recognizable names in modern ministry. To the outside world, he was living proof that God could turn a mess into a miracle. But behind the applause, the lights and the television cameras, cracks were beginning to show. Because while he was helping thousands find freedom, he was quietly losing his own. Fame, even when it comes in the name of faith, can be a dangerous thing. With success came pressure, endless expectations to lead, to perform, to be perfect. The more his platform grew, the more the weight on his shoulders intensified. Friends began to notice changes in him. He was tired, moody, withdrawn. Rumors began to circulate about marital problems and burnout. The love story that had once built a church began to unravel. By 2009, after years of trying to balance ministry with personal life, Zachery and Riva divorced. It was a painful public separation that left both the church and their followers stunned. Some judged him, others defended him, but no one really knew the depth of the storm raging inside him. After the divorce, he kept smiling for the cameras, he kept preaching about forgiveness and faith, but those closest to him saw a man quietly unraveling. The very thing that once gave him life, his calling, had begun to drain it out of him. He often disappeared for days, saying he was taking time to rest or seeking God's presence. But whispers began to spread that he was slipping back into old habits, that the demons he once conquered were returning. It was a silent war, one that no one could fight for him. In August 2011, Pastor Tims checked into the W Hotel in New York City, supposedly on a ministry trip. What happened next would shock the entire Christian world. On August 12, housekeeping staff found him unresponsive in his room. The news spread like wildfire. Pastor Zachery Tims, only 42 years old, was dead. At first, details were scarce. The church issued a short statement asking for privacy. But soon, questions began to rise. Why was he alone? What had happened? When police searched the room, they found a small envelope containing a white powdery substance. For weeks, the medical examiner withheld the results, and speculation grew. When the toxicology report was finally released, the truth was heartbreaking. Zachery had died from an apparent overdose. The man who had once preached about deliverance from addiction had been caught once more in its grip. The revelation sent shockwaves through the Christian community. For many, it wasn't anger they felt, it was sorrow. Sorrow that someone who had done so much good, who had pulled so many people out of darkness, couldn't escape his own. His death became more than a tragedy, it became a mirror, reflecting the silent suffering that too many leaders endure behind closed doors. At New Destiny Christian Center, grief quickly turned to confusion. The congregation, still reeling from the news, now faced another painful question: who would lead them? Many assumed Riva would return to the pulpit. After all, she had helped build the ministry from the ground up. But in a surprising move, the church board appointed Pastor Paula White as the new senior pastor. That decision divided the church almost instantly. Some felt it was a betrayal of Zachery's legacy. Others believed it was a necessary step to preserve the ministry. What followed was a bitter public battle. Riva filed a lawsuit, claiming the transition was handled improperly. Church members protested, debates erupted online, and what had once been a thriving congregation was now a battlefield of grief, anger, and mistrust. Riva Tims, in her interviews, often spoke about her late husband with tenderness rather than resentment. She reminded people that Zachery's life shouldn't be defined by his final moments, but by the thousands of lives he touched, and she was right. For every headline that focused on his downfall, there were countless stories of addicts who found freedom because of his words, of broken families restored, of souls who believed again because he showed them it was possible. Even today, over a decade later, the church he founded still stands. The faces have changed, the leadership has shifted, but the spirit of what he built lives on. Every Sunday people still gather under that roof, singing the same songs, carrying the same faith, remembering the same message he once preached, that no matter how far you've fallen, God can still bring you home.